Hi, my name is John, and today I'll be going through some actionable steps on how to get better in maths by changing your attitude. Let's get into it. Everyone knows that the easiest way to get better at maths is to have a positive mindset. Yet still, even though we know this, a lot of students still have negative thoughts about it and simply dislike it. Therefore, they don't really get the marks that they're looking for in that subject. Instead, they look to focus on other areas that they're better at. And they think to themselves different excuses to make up for that. Some explanations could be, my parents are kind of bad at it, why should I be good at math? Another misconception is that if other students are bad at math and people are saying that they're also bad at math, then maybe it's okay if I'm also bad at math. Or the one that I hear from both parents and students alike is that I don't plan on being an engineer or a data scientist, so why should I need it? I want to be something that won't really use maths, and maybe math isn't as practical today as we have access to computer as well as a calculator. These are some pretty big misconceptions, and it's important to dispel these myths. Otherwise, we are going to normalize that it's okay to be bad at something, and maths is so critical for us to really succeed in today's society. By dispelling these misconceptions, you will then slowly develop a positive mindset towards maths, and the earlier you do this, the better. I will now go through some research as to why we may have math negativity and how we can start to tackle this. Firstly, let's start with the influence from parents. My parent is also in this category as well, where when they were younger and they had to go through the system back in China, for instance, it was a lot different to what it is today. They really relied on memorization, where if they memorized and went through all of the questions and all of the concepts in a particular textbook, then they're going to succeed in a particular exam because they would only test the things in that one textbook. Unfortunately, this isn't really relevant in today's testing methods in what we do here in Australia. Nevertheless, a lot of parents still try to adopt this approach. When you are trying to adopt what you did as a child and what made you successful to what your children are really doing today, it's not going to be the same because you can't just put a cookie cutter approach in today's evolving society. Instead, it's important to adapt to what the child's learning. And if we see exams like the opportunity class exam or even the selective exam, let alone the NAPLAN exam, we can tell that they don't pull questions from a singular source, like back in China, for instance, where they just have this one textbook. Instead, they really have multiple sources where they branch it by topic. So whether it be by fractions, whether it be by English and comprehension, they pull questions from all these different sources, and you can't just memorize and just go through every single question from this one thing, because it's very important to be well-rounded across multiple, as well as be able to apply different theories and concepts to a variety of questions. You can't just be good in a certain type of question, you have to be good in a very broad range of it in order to answer the questions effectively. This can result in students not liking maths because when they're being taught memorization techniques, which is pretty effective when you're learning things like the times tables when you are young, when you are taught different strategies from different teachers, whether it be a tutor or even your primary or high school teacher, and they're using techniques like inquiring or manipulatives, they might have resistance towards this. They're like, I just want to memorize something. Just teach me this, give me repeated practice, and I could do well, because that's what parents have taught them. But instead, if they're not open to different learning and teaching strategies, that can actually make them kind of singular in focus and not allow them to learn and grow. This is also supported in the past, where the majority of students, such as in my parents' generation, they were largely kinesthetic and visual learners, and this meant that they learned the best through repeated and sheer repetition of certain questions. But there is been a rise in students that are not really this. There's been a transition where they are now spatial visual learners, and essentially they learn by seeing and doing, so a blend of both. This has been around 50-ish% compared to the ones that were learning through sheer repetition, which has kind of gone down to about 30% of the population according to a study. Because of this, here at Bings Academy, we always do a bit of a blend. So sometimes, even if it's an online class, they're doing a lot of visual learning, but they're still able to apply blended learning through kinesthetic and actual touching actually doing physical questions as well, as we'll be sending over worksheets and they can print it out or just do it on a piece of paper and then before sending it back to us. We've found that this is a lot more effective as opposed to purely doing things on paper and not actually showing it through them or going through question by question on how to actually tackle it. A blend between those both has been the most effective from our opinion as well. This also leads on to the second reason for why we have a lot of students actually disliking maths, and this could be due to the lack of clarity that we have with maths. And you might be thinking, how can there be a lack of clarity with math when there can only be one answer? That is true to an extent compared to subjects like English and writing, but the way that I'm thinking about this is quite simple, and I'll go through it in my way. Let's use times tables again as an example. So when you learn timetables in primary school, one of the most effective ways to actually learn this is through memorization. So using the skill memorizing, right? And when students are learning this from a pretty young age, maybe year 1, at most year 2, when they're learning the times tables, they know that if they can memorize something and they know it off by heart, that it provides positive results. How? Because they're getting questions right because of it. However, when maths becomes more difficult and you have to do long division, for instance, and you have to incorporate decimal points and remainders and even some fractions, then it could be a little bit of an issue where you can't just use memorizing anymore. Now you have to explain to them, they have to include remainders in this area, you might have to include some fractions in this point, there have to be some decimal points and you have to jump through here, or you have to move this number here. So sometimes we can develop a confusion because of this, as we are not explicitly told why we have to include these remainders or why we have to include these decimal points in the first place. This is very unlike when you're learning at the very beginning, when you're first introduced to maths, we just memorize for the fact and fact, and it's very easy for us to kind of visualize and think about it in that way. But when maths becomes more difficult, then students are troubled because there's not enough clarity in regards to why we have to present a number in a certain way when it's the same answer at the end. So now we know why math negativity can occur. Let's go through some strategies on how we can actually address this and resolve this. The first strategy is to be a math ally. This means parents should actually try to help their child understand the importance of it and the practical applications that it can be. You want to be integrating it in everyday and real life scenarios as much as you can. For instance, when you go to Woolworths or Coles, you see something for 10% off, try to get them to do calculations in their mind or try to answer that for you. If they can actually see what the price is after 10% off and how much saving that you can actually have, then they can actually feel a sense of self-worth and they can see the benefits of actually learning math in the first place. What you can also do is when they're about to watch their TV show on television, maybe you can ask how many minutes is it to the actual television show. They have to calculate how many minutes before it starts, and they are rewarded in the end because they get to watch their favorite TV show. Being able to ask them and seeing the importance of it in that way allows students to develop a positive inclination or attitude towards this, and it will decrease the likelihood of you developing math negativity. If they are interested in maths from a young age because of this, then if later years, maybe in high school or even in late primary school, if they don't understand a question in math, they'll be really upfront and transparent about it because they know that you also like math, and if they need any assistance, then they can come to you. You don't want to be in a situation where they might like maths at the beginning, but then they develop a dislike towards it and they don't even tell you about it. So you're not even sure how you can assist because they're blocking you out completely. The second strategy that I would recommend is to allow retests. And you might be thinking, why would we get our children to actually do the question or do the actual test paper again? Well, here's the thing. You want them to be okay with the questions that you're doing now before you move on to something more difficult. We know that the majority of math questions relies on the math fundamentals. So if your basics are weak, this actually results in lower marks, and you would actually be able to tell that you're only hitting maybe the 60 to 70%, or another indication that the fundamentals is a bit weak is if they're very inconsistent with their scores, where sometimes they might get really high and other times they might get really low, which kind of means they don't really know what they're talking about, and sometimes they may have to be guessing, especially if the test has multiple choice involved in it. Allow retests, especially if they're not getting over 70%, and this helps promote a safe learning environment where it's okay for them to get the questions wrong, but if they do get the questions wrong, do it again. Do the entire test again, and it's okay as long as you learn from it. But it's not okay if you just did the exam once and you kind of go through the answers for the questions that you got wrong, but you're not really doing it again, or you don't really understand it. Just because a lot of the fundamentals and the questions that you learn in math actually build upon previous learning modules and topics as well. So if your understanding of fractions, for instance, is really poor, then how can you even go into mixed fractions? It just doesn't work like that. You have to know a maths concept really well before you can move on to even more complex maths concepts. This leads on to the third and final strategy, which is to see the real-world applications of math. So this is critical because you want to be able to capture the imagination of the student so that they can actually see how practical it can be. In a normal class, for instance, if you were to teach a children, basically you can say if there's 3 students that are absent, just ask, how would you write that as a fraction? How many people were away in your class today? So how would they write that as a percentage or something like that? That's a very easy way for you to actually apply that in a real world setting so they can actually see the importance, so that when they go beyond just memorization from early years and they are open to different teaching methods and different teaching styles, then this will allow them to really grow and have a positive attitude towards maths. Additionally, by seeing the significance of math in the real world, you can actually go far beyond just memorization. And coming from someone who also attended a selective high school and finished university, memorizing can only take you so far. It can be very practical and a bit useful in the very short term, but if you want to succeed in the long run and you want to be able to learn it once, understand it properly, you don't really have to learn it over and over and over again to be able to apply and to go to harder concepts, then I would suggest to be open about it and to go beyond memorization as early as you can. In conclusion, math negativity can come from our parents who might have the best of intentions, but are trying to apply what has worked from them and what they were kind of taught when they were young to students that are taught completely different in today's day and age, especially in the Australian curriculum. Additionally, math negativity can also stem from a lack of clarity towards math and a lack of explanation, where if parents or even teachers that can't adequately explain why we have to incorporate certain math fundamentals or math concepts the way it is, then students will not like it as much compared to other subjects as well. I introduced a couple of different strategies that we can actually use to tackle this, such as being a math ally, showing the real world applications of it. Hopefully you guys really enjoyed this. If you guys have any questions, feel free to write this down in the comments below. I check all your comments and I really value each and every one of them. Otherwise, visit bigsacademy.com and I'll be happy to chat with you then. I think that's about it. See you guys next time. Bye.